Right now, somewhere, a company that could have been saved is failing. Not because the business wasn't viable, not because the market turned against them, and not because they ran out of time. They're failing because the people in charge waited too long to act, and by the time they moved, their options had already disappeared. That is the story we see over and over again, and it is entirely preventable. The difference between a business that navigates financial distress successfully and one that doesn't is rarely about the severity of the problem. It is almost always about the speed and discipline of the response. The leaders who protect their companies are the ones who recognize the signals early, take deliberate action to stabilize what matters most, and move before the window closes, not after. This video is for those leaders. If your organization is under financial pressure, if restructuring conversations are on the horizon, if creditors are tightening, if the balance sheet is creating sleepless nights, what follows is exactly what you need to be doing right now. Not next quarter, now, because in a distress situation, time is not neutral. Every week of inaction is a week of options you will never get back. Every company that survives a financial storm has one thing in common. They didn't panic, they stabilized, and then they steered. This is how you do that. Let's start by naming the real threat. Because most leaders in distress are focused on the wrong thing. Financial distress has a way of creating enormous noise. Creditor demands, covenant breaches, rumors circulating inside your organization, board pressure, media speculation, legal complexity. Each of these feels urgent, and in many ways, they are. But none of them are the real threat to your business. The real threat is operational erosion. When the financial storm hits, if you're not paying deliberate attention, the operational foundation starts to crack quietly underneath you. Customers begin to defect. Key employees start taking calls from competitors. Suppliers tighten payment terms or pull credit lines. And suddenly, the business you're trying to save no longer resembles the one you started with. The enterprise value you're working so hard to protect in a negotiating room is quietly leaking out the door. So before you negotiate a single cent of debt, before you retain restructuring counsel, before the first creditor committee meeting, you need to ask yourself one honest question. What is the core of this business, and is it still intact? Everything that follows in this video is built around answering and protecting that answer. Over the course of many restructurings, across industries and company sizes, there are 4 operational pillars that consistently determine whether a business comes through a restructuring intact, or doesn't. These aren't abstract concepts. They are the 4 areas where enterprise value either holds or bleeds during a period of financial distress. Let's go through each one in depth. The first pillar is your people, specifically, your critical talent. Your most urgent job the moment restructuring becomes visible, internally or externally, is to identify and protect the employees who are truly irreplaceable to the business. Not the most senior people, not necessarily the highest paid, the most essential, the people whose departure would directly impair the business's ability to operate, serve customers, or generate cash. In most organizations, that's somewhere between 10 and 15% of the workforce. These are the people your competitors will call first. And in a distress situation, those calls come fast. You need to move before the calls become offers. That means 2 things. First, retention agreements, real, legally binding instruments with meaningful financial incentives tied to staying through the restructuring process. A conversation or a promise is not enough. People need a concrete reason to stay when uncertainty is high and external options are available. Second, and equally important, is communication. The single most dangerous thing you can do with your workforce during restructuring is go silent. People fill information vacuums with fear, and fear accelerates departure. You don't need to share everything. In fact, there are things you legally cannot share during a restructuring process. But you need a communication rhythm. Regular, honest, leader-led updates that acknowledge the situation, outline what is known, and reinforce what is being done to protect the business and the people in it. Employees can tolerate uncertainty far better than they can tolerate silence. Designate a single internal source of truth. Make sure managers know how to answer questions. And make sure your most critical people hear from someone they trust, directly, personally, not through a company-wide email. The second pillar is your customers, and specifically, your ability to control the narrative before the market does it for you. Your customer relationships are the engine of enterprise value. They represent future cash flow, contracted revenue, referral potential, and in many cases, the entire thesis for why this business has value at all. And they are fragile under distress. Not because customers are disloyal, but because they have their own businesses to run. If your financial situation creates uncertainty about supply continuity, service levels, or your long-term viability as a partner, a rational customer will begin qualifying your competitors. Not necessarily to replace you, just to protect themselves. And the moment that process starts, you have lost leverage. Your job is to get ahead of it. That means proactive, personal outreach, not a mass communication, not a press release, not a form letter. Direct contact from a senior leader to your most important accounts before they hear about your restructuring from anywhere else. The message doesn't need to be complicated. What it needs to convey is three things: that you are going through a structured process, that the process is designed to strengthen the business, and that their continuity and service levels are protected. Give them a name, a specific point of contact on your team who owns that relationship through the process. Prioritize ruthlessly here. Your top 20% of customers likely represent 80% of your revenue. That is where your outreach effort should be concentrated. Long-term contract holders, customers with high switching costs, customers who have deep operational dependencies on your product or service. These are the relationships you cannot afford to lose to a preventable information gap. Confidence, it turns out, is contagious. So is panic. What you communicate, and how, will determine which one spreads. The third pillar is your supplier and vendor network, and this is one of the most underestimated risk areas in any restructuring. Suppliers react fast. The moment financial distress becomes known in the market, you may see payment terms tighten overnight. Credit lines pulled. COD requirements imposed without warning. In some cases, suppliers simply stop shipping until they have clarity on your situation. Each of these reactions, individually, is manageable. Together, they can create a liquidity spiral that accelerates your distress even when your restructuring plan is otherwise sound. You can be doing everything right on the financial side and still find your operations shutting down because a critical supplier has gone into protect mode. The first step is visibility. Conduct an immediate vendor dependency analysis. Map your entire supplier base against two dimensions. How operationally critical are they, meaning, if they stop tomorrow, what shuts down in your business, and how exposed are they to your financial situation, either through outstanding payables or contract terms. Where those two factors overlap, high criticality, high exposure, that is your priority action list. For those critical suppliers, get in front of them. Have a direct, honest conversation before they hear anything in the market. Offer transparency about your timeline. In many cases, providing even a modest prepayment on a specific invoice, or simply confirming a payment schedule, is enough to preserve the relationship and maintain shipping continuity. The cost of that conversation, and even the cost of that prepayment, is a fraction of what you would pay in operational disruption if that supplier puts you on hold. Relationships matter here. A vendor who trusts you will extend you far more flexibility than one who feels blindsided. The fourth pillar is cash visibility, and this is the one that underlies everything else. You cannot stabilize what you cannot see. In a restructuring environment, your traditional financial reporting is not sufficient. Annual budgets, quarterly forecasts, monthly P&L statements, these tools are valuable in a stable operating environment. They are inadequate when you are navigating week to week through financial distress. What you need is a 13-week cash flow forecast, a rolling, week-by-week view of every dollar of cash coming into the business and every dollar going out, projected forward across a 90-day horizon and updated continuously as new information comes in. This document becomes the most important thing your finance team produces during a restructuring. It is the instrument that tells you how much runway you have before the next critical decision point. It informs which vendors get paid this week and which obligations need to be deferred. It tells your advisors and your creditors what the business looks like in real time. It is the foundation of any creditor negotiation, because you cannot negotiate from a position of credibility if you cannot answer the most basic question: how much cash do you have and how long will it last? If your finance team is not producing a 13-week cash flow forecast right now, that changes today. Not next week, today. Build it, review it weekly, stress test it against downside scenarios. What happens to your runway if a major customer delays payment? What happens if a key supplier demands accelerated terms? The answers to those questions, in advance, are what allow you to make decisions with confidence rather than react in crisis. Now let me be direct about what goes wrong, because the same mistakes appear in restructuring after restructuring, and they're almost always avoidable. The first mistake is over-focusing on the financial negotiation while the operating business deteriorates in the background. The restructuring table matters enormously, but if your entire senior leadership bandwidth is consumed by creditor negotiations while customer churn is accelerating, your operations team is losing key managers, and your supply chain is quietly destabilizing, you may win the negotiation and still lose the company. The financial restructuring is designed to save the business. If the business itself is eroding while the restructuring is happening, you are negotiating to save something that is already disappearing. The second mistake is communicating too late. Employees, customers, and suppliers are sophisticated. They pick up signals: a change in payment behavior, a shift in leadership tone, unusual activity around legal or financial advisors. These things don't go unnoticed. If you wait until restructuring news breaks externally to begin your stakeholder communications, you've already lost control of the narrative. You are now reacting to other people's interpretations of your situation rather than shaping that understanding yourself. The organizations that navigate this best are the ones that choose to communicate early, honestly, and with discipline, even when the message is uncomfortable. The third mistake is treating all costs the same. In distress, the instinct, and sometimes the mandate from advisors, is to cut. Cut headcount, cut spending, cut anything that isn't essential. And cost discipline is real and necessary. But indiscriminate cutting is dangerous. The capabilities that make this business viable post-restructuring, the customer relationships, the operational expertise, the technical know-how, these often live in costs. Cutting them saves money in the short term and destroys value in the long term. The question to ask before every significant cut is not just, can we afford this? But, can we afford to lose this? All of this ultimately comes down to leadership, and what this moment demands of the people at the top. Restructuring is one of the most demanding environments any executive or board member will face. The decisions are consequential, the timeline is compressed, information is incomplete, stakeholders are nervous, and the margin for error is thin. There is no manual that makes it simple, and no advisor who can substitute for clear-eyed, disciplined leadership at the top of the organization. The leaders who navigate this well share something in common: they remain intentional. They don't chase every fire. They aren't pulled into every urgent conversation at the expense of the important ones. They know what they are protecting, they have defined it explicitly, and they protect it with focus and consistency. They communicate when it's uncomfortable. They make hard calls before those calls are forced on them. And they hold the organization steady when the natural instinct is to fragment. Your enterprise value is not an abstraction. It is not a number on a page in a restructuring memo. It lives in your customer relationships, in your team's capability and commitment, in your supplier network, in your operational systems and institutional knowledge. These are the things that will determine what comes out on the other side of this process. Guard them, deliberately, proactively, and without apology. And the restructuring itself, as complex and demanding as it is, becomes something you can navigate. If your business is experiencing financial pressure and you need a structured path forward, connect with Equus Capital Finance. We work with business owners and developers to stabilize operations, structure capital solutions, and reposition opportunities for successful execution. The earlier you act, the more options you preserve. And if this was valuable to you, share it with someone who needs it. A colleague, a board member, a leadership team that is starting to see the warning signs. These conversations are better when the right people are having them early.